and fly the old crate to the tune of his horn.
I'm just a co-pilot and a long way from home.
I take all the readings and check on the power. I turn on the heaters when we're in a shower. I hustle him out for the midnight alarm. I fly through the fog while he sleeps on my arm.
I'm just a co-pilot and a long way from home.
I treat him to coffee, I buy him his cokes. I laugh at his corn and his horrible jokes. And once in a while when his landings are rusty, I come through with, "Yas, show is gusty."
I'm just a co-pilot and a long way from home.
An honest attempt to preserve even more the history of our outstanding 392nd, its trials and tribulations, its records, its achievements, its anguishes, and other things as we all knew. This first session in a series of 3 over the next 2 days will attempt to capture firsthand a true cross-section of this illustrious history, all now some 50 years ago, and given by some of the key individuals who were there and experienced these events. Many of you out there did as well. To our knowledge, it is a first for any 8th Air Force bomb group in accomplishing a truly oral and visual accounting for our perpetual archival records, as these will stand long after we have passed this scene. It can only be a beginning, and I would suggest we could call it page 1, if you will. To do such an epical thing, we feel, in such a short time. We can only give it an honest effort to at least scratch the surface. We hope and trust there can be many more such occasions, addendums, if you will, to these very fine programs and structured into our next reunions as they come, as long as it's earthly possible to do so. In this short 1.5 hours, please sit back now, reflect, enjoy, recall, if you will, where you truly fitted into these overall times, for we know many and plus all of you did. We're delighted to have our fine moderator, Keith Roberts, whom you know well, our commanders and his key panelists, who present to you this morning our first symposium effort, the early days of the 392nd.
Thank you, Robert. It's a real honor for me to moderate this one, because you're looking here at the real pioneers of the 392nd Bomb Group. And I don't need to introduce them to you, but I will introduce them to the historian. On my immediate right is Colonel Lawrence G. Gilbert, USA Air Force retired, the first operations officer and the last commanding officer of the 392nd Bomb Group, and now the president of our Memorial Association, Colonel Gilbert, on my immediate right. Next, on my immediate right, is Mr. Gil Bambauer, retired businessman, who is one of the fathers of our Memorial Association. He gathered the first names, the first lists. He was a flying equipment sergeant at Windley. Next is Mr. Cecil Rocky Rothrock, who flew as a gunner on Harrison Castle's crew on our group's first mission. He's now a Wisconsin attorney. Is Jim Gore, Mr. Jim Gore, an active businessman in Frankfort, Indiana, and of course the producer of our really fine newsletter. Next down, Colonel Myron Kyleman, U.S. Air Force retired, a longtime commander of the 579th Squadron from the 4th mission to the very end of the war. Next, Colonel Kenneth Paddock, our first group navigator, and on my far right, Colonel Joe Whitaker, U.S. Air Force retired, our first group bombardier. Gentlemen, you're looking at some of the pioneers. I'd like to hear a hand for these people. You are also looking at 3 of the first 6 men that were assigned on the original order of the 392nd. Colonels Gilbert, Colonel Spaddock, and Colonels Whitaker, 3 of the first 6. I'm going to ask some questions, and my first question will be to all of you, and I'll ask you to take it one at a time, if you would. First of all, when and where did you join the 392nd? What was your rank and job assignment at the time, and how old were you? Colonel Gilbert?
Last question he asked on the age is going to be a tough one. I'm trying to remember what I said last night. I want this answer this morning to be consistent with last night. If we say some remarks that you wonder whether they should be on the record or not, Dan McGovern's record, the Anthology Committee will have an opportunity later on to edit some of these remarks and make lots of blue pencil entries on them. But to answer the question, when did I join the 392nd? It was February of 1943 at Tucson, Davis Mountain Field in Tucson. I was a captain at the time, and again, I think this is consistent with my age stated last night. I was 24 at the time, and that is the truth, as I recall it. Am I alive?
Mr. Gil Bambauer, would you answer that same question, please?
Thank you, Keith, and good morning. I was quite a young guy and kicked out of the cadet program down at Keesler Field, and I was a casual. Joined the 74th Service Squadron in Yuma. As soon as I got on board there, boy, we were hot, the first sergeant says. We're going overseas. So we got a complete set of suntans. We wound up in England with our greatcoats and ODs. And there's where I joined the 392nd. And what was the rest of the question? My age?
Your age, sir.
I think I was 19 at the time. Thank you.
Rocky?
Well, I joined the 392nd in Tucson, February of 1943. It was a beautiful winter, and I was 19. I was a staff sergeant and gunner, and I was assigned to Harrison Castle's crew, and there are 2 others that joined at the same time. Lieutenant Jack Colvin and our bombardier Bill Sutton were sitting in the screen, but that we joined in Tucson and went all the way with the group.
Jim?
I'm just a little bit out of place here. I'm standing in for Colonel Poking, who isn't feeling very well this morning. Colonel Poking, as I'm sure all of you know, was the first one. It's getting in the way of my nose. Colonel Poking was the first commander of 578, and I don't want to take a lot of valuable time. It is what I say one of the most outstanding men I've ever served under, either in civilian life or in the service. I came to the 392nd shortly after they arrived at Alamogordo, a brand new second lieutenant, right out of OCS, green as grass. They didn't have any place for me. I was extra. They made me assistant supply officer. I was, I think, 23 at the time.
Jim referred to it, and I don't know whether you all got this, but Colonel Warren Polking, who was the first 578 squadron commander, was planned for this symposium and just couldn't quite make it this morning. He wasn't feeling well. He came down and left us with a memento, which I'll bring up later. Next.
Just recently returned to the zone of the interior from 18 months in Panama, Guatemala, and Ecuador, flying ocean patrol in defense of the Panama Canal, B-17s and B-24s. At the point in time, May of 43, I was instructing in B-24s in a provisional training group, and I got word at El Paso one day that I was to be assigned to the 392nd as a squadron operations officer. that suited me fine. I was a first lieutenant. May 1943. I was 27 years old. I remember that. Louder as I got married when I was 27.
Gee, he was an old man.
Colonel Paddock?
Well, the data for me is just the same as it is for Colonel Gilbert, except that I was 3 years older than he. I was the old man of the outfit. I was 27 years old. And Colonel Gilbert and I first met at Parks Air College in 1941. February, I believe it was, 1941. And we were there together, and then we went to Randolph Field together, but they found out I had lateral nystagmus at Randolph, and so they sent me back to Coast Artillery Corps, and then gave me a chance to go to navigation school in grade. And so then when I graduated, I joined up with Gilbert again in Pendleton, Oregon. And so we were together all the way down through Ephrata, Washington to Blythe, California, and we got our orders there to go to the 392nd. And so we were together there throughout the war, and I was 27 at the time.
Good morning. I was on the original orders forming the 392nd that was dated January 26th of 1943. No, that was the date of the original 392nd. The orders that we were on were dated February 23rd of 1943. I met Colonel Rendell, Captain Gilbert, and Patty, First Lieutenant then, and myself up at Geiger Field in Spokane, Washington. We were with the old 34th as Bomb Group 7th, and we went down to Blythe, and from there we went to Tucson on that date, February 23rd of 43. So that's really the official date that we first flying officers joined the 392nd. We were all together, however, from September the 7th of 1942 at Geiger Field, Spokane, Washington, and Ephrata, and then down to Blythe. So the four of us were really working together earlier than many people realized. I was the first lieutenant and was the group bombardier. I was 25 years old, however, and was considered one of the older officers. We find that we're 25 or over, we're kind of considered older officers. I was graduated from my university in 1940, and I had previous service as a Naval Aviation Cadet at Pensacola, and I put an SNJ-3 in there and got busted out in a hurry. I then went into the Army in 28th Division, went up through all the enlisted ranks before entering the Air Force after Pearl Harbor. Then we people that had been busted out were given an opportunity to go back into Navy navigation.
Thank you, Joe. The next question I'm going to ask is of all the panelists. Please relate one special personal experience that exemplifies for you the early days of the 392nd. Colonel Gill, will you take the first whack at that one?
I'm thinking first personal experience is very vivid in my memory. Was not flown with the 392nd. I was assigned to the 392nd at the time, but I went over to the advance party. Bo Randall, I think Joe Whitaker, probably Kenny Paddock were on it a month ahead of the 392nd. We spent that 30 days in indoctrination briefings down at Bomber Command in London. Then were released to go out and spend a little time with B-17 groups that were already in the theater and had been battle seasoned, and a chance to fly with them. We flew one mission, both Randall and myself, with the 351st Bomb Group at Polk, who whose commander was a Marchfield classmate, contemporary of Bo Reynolds, Colonel Hatcher, Willie Hatcher. And we flew the second mission with another good friend of Bo Reynolds. I'll think of the name of that commander, but at any rate, it was the 381st Bomb Group, also B-17s at Ridgewell. The first mission that we flew, Reynolds and myself, with the 351st, I was put down in the nose of the B-17 up in the high right squadron where the visibility was probably the best to get an overall view of what was going on. And I'll get to the point in a moment why that mission is etched in my brain forever. The target was Kiel, and a moderate to moderate heavy amount of flak, and that was not a particularly enjoyable experience, particularly when I looked around and I could see a lot of tension on the part of bombardier and navigator around me, not to speak of what tension was going on within Gilbert himself. But after, it was a pretty good visual run, after we turned away from the target, we bombed on a south to north heading and turned west for the safety of the North Sea. Then I sensed, I don't think I had an interphone available to me, or headset, to hear what all the chatter was going on in that airplane. But I sensed a new level of tension in the bombardier and the navigator down there in the nose, and they got more agitated on their interphone with the rest of the crew and started looking out that way and pointing. And what they were pointing towards, I could not see anything. But then, as they got closer, I could count 15 or 20 enemy fighters out there flying parallel to us on a east to west heading, gradually pulling ahead of us. And you guessed it, in about 1 minute, when I thought they had disappeared and were abandoning any thought of bothering with us, I got the impression that here they come. There were 3 50 caliber guns up in the nose of that B-17. The navigator was manning one, the bombardier manning the second one. No one ever told me what I was supposed to do except stay out of the way up there. And that was the general impression I had when I first boarded the aircraft, that I was sort of unnecessary baggage and going to clutter up the freedom of movement up there in the nose of the B-17. But when the first wave came through, I was standing there hoping that somebody was controlling the situation, and a lot of gunfire and chatter, and there was an empty available 50 caliber over on my side. I'd never fired one before, but I didn't know how to cock it, to charge it. So when that second wave came through on head-on attacks, well, I honed in on that lead FW that came in, got off 2 or 3 good bursts. I missed him by probably a half a mile at least. Not nearly, if there are gunners here, there are some gunners here, they're not. There's something called leading the target, you know. I was leading the target, but only about that much, I guess, and I should have been leading the target by like that much, but I got off several good bursts, and that was an experience that I will not forget. The pilot came, the enemy fighter came through close enough that I got a good look at him as he went through the rate of closure. He was gently fishtailing, I suppose, to throw off our aim. He didn't have to do that to throw off my aim. But that was an experience, my one and only opportunity to fire a gun at the enemy in anger. I wasn't so mad, I was scared. My experience.
Thank you, Colonel Gill. Mr. Gill.
Now remember, I was a PVT when I got over there, and there wasn't a lot going on except we were going from from one site to another, sort of straightening out straightening out the barracks areas, raking, trying to get the bomb shelters dry. Excuse me. But the one thing I can remember is that they would come through the barracks and say, well, the black hangar needs sweeping. Now, if you remember that black hangar, and I call it the black hangar, they're all black, and the only one on the field. Well, I went up there, and here, sure enough, they had a broom handle that fit my hands, and I was doing all the offices and the main hangar if there was no planes there yet. But I try to keep it clean for it. That's about what I can remember when I first got to Windland.
Gil, thank you. Rocky?
Colonel, you should have had an Emerson turret on that damn B-17. You might have been better off.
Then the rest of the formation would have been in danger.
I think some of the things that I remember being in running back was we were so proud of those wings, and we were so proud to be in that organization. And so if we wanted to, I think one of the items that that meant a great deal to a lot of us was when we got to Wendling, and we were ready to fight. And the first thing that happened to it, and we put on a train and we went to a place called Train, which is south central England. And so on the train we got off at Victoria Cross, I think, in London, and it went out on the street. And Edward R. Murrow was not reporting those bombings very well because the cabs were running, the pubs were open, people were going back and forth, and it wasn't what Edward R. Murrow had been telling us on the radio. We went over to Train. We spent 10 days with an RAF group over there, and it was more or less an orientation. But that first few days at Train taught all of us that, hey, this war is just not a plaything, and you're not going to whip them all at once. It was a great experience to be with those RAF people. After that, we returned to Wendling and waited for our first mission.
Thank you, Rocky. Jim?
The ground echelon got into Wendling a month or so ahead of the air echelon. The air echelon was in Topeka picking up their airplanes, and I think there was some delay waiting for the J model with the turret. The 392nd was the first B-24 unit into the theater with a nose turret. So the ground echelon were kept busy getting ready, and of course morale is important when you're in a theater like that. And then we had to set up liberty runs to town, and it fell on my duty to be a convoy commander on one of the first liberty runs. Fortunately, the driver knew what he was doing. The convoy commander didn't. Everything was blacked out. If you remember that early in those days, we drove blacked out. And coming back from King's Lynn, the driver says, "Well, I'm going to go in the back way." So I didn't know the difference. Okay. Pretty soon I sensed that he was lost. And we were leading this convoy around all those winding English roads, wondering what's going to happen to this convoy. Finally, we came out in the darkness on the widest superhighway I'd ever seen in my life. And we brought that convoy down the main runway and into the motor pool. We were glad to be home.
Colonel Myron?
When we got to England, each squadron had it.
You're not on.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. When we got to England, each squadron had 9 of the finest and the best trained B-24 crews in the whole 8th Air Force. One of the big reasons was that the other 3 B-24 groups just got back from Italy, North Africa, and flying the Great Gillespie raid amongst other missions, and they were beat up. So while they were regrouping, our 392nd flew diversion missions up into the North Sea for the B-24s. Our B-17 units that were striking places like Frankfurt and Regensburg and the like. So on the 4th of October, we had a mission to make a feint at Bremen, then back off and make another one at Emden, and come on home, safe and sound. Well, while we were making this feint, it was a beautiful clear day, and we had two 18-ship formations, the lead and the high right. I think the 44th had 3 or 4 ships with us. So we were flying up there, just as usual, real beautiful formation. And on our second pass, going in towards Emden, here all these fighters showed up. And of course, could be nobody else but the Germans. And our diversion proved a big success. Those devils, they really come bore in on us. And I'm sure they didn't know we had those turrets. And they come right straight in at us. I think the first pass. And I was flying deputy to Colonel Johnson on the lead block. And my squadron commander was commander of the high block. Well, one of the German fighters got too eager and didn't pull up in time and crashed into the deputy lead, who in turn plowed into the lead airplane, who in turn plowed into the number 3 man. And all 3 crews, including the squadron commander on 579th, went down. And so that, we lost a couple other airplanes too. I don't remember where they were in the formation. But I just remember so well those fighters pouring in on us and repeated attacks. And Lieutenant Nicholson, the aircraft commander, was flying and sitting in there real tight, and I got nervous. With the airplane in the sky, I didn't have anything to do, you know. So I hit Nick on the shoulder and I took over and I flew while to get my mind off of these fighters. He watched them for a while and he hit me. So we went back and forth, alternating flying that airplane to keep from having to watch the fighters. And the gunners, of course, were real busy. Well, that night, it was a real terrible experience. I've never had hardships in my life. I never faced family death in our family or even close friends. So this was a terrible experience for me. And on top of that, I was called in the operations office, group operations, and Colonel Reynolds advised me that I'd take over the squadron. So boy, I had that on my shoulders, on my mind. And we flew the next day, so I got busy and we got no problems. And about a week later, one of our airplanes flew up on the ramp in the dispersal. One of the airmen tried to refuel the auxiliary power unit while it was running. And they were loading bombs. And sure enough, putt-putt as we call it, caught fire. And there's no way he could fire. He could put that gasoline fire out, apparently. And it was quite a holocaust. Plane burning, all that. refueled, full of what?
2700.
6,000 pounds of high octane, 100 octane.
7 pounds, yeah.
And all those bombs and all the ammunition, it was a hell of a show. And one of the crew from 576, I believe it was, we got back from the Liberty Run, saw this thing, and he ran, the two of them ran out there, and we jumped in the airplane right across the taxiway, and fired it up, and taxied it out of the way, and then saved that airplane. But and the other airplanes adjacent dispersal got flak, burning debris, but they didn't catch fire. So I lost, it was 3 airplanes right there on the ramp. Old squadron commander. Well, to make this story a little shorter, another ordeal, I was living in a bay about half the size of this room with 4 officers of 2 crews, the 8 of us and myself, squadron operations officers. And unknown to me, I was having nightmares. And finally, I must have gone along about a week or so of Calvin. Anyway, they had a meeting apparently and said, somebody's got to tell the captain, he got a promotion at that time, what's going on. Because he's going to drive us crazy if he keeps us raving. So, Lieutenant McGregor, the pilot of one of the crews, collared me one day one evening after dining home, and told me I was creating this disturbance. And if I didn't get a hold of myself, I would drive the rest of the crew to wit's end. So from that moment on, I was able to cast all horrible, all bad things out of my mind. And to this day, I've been told by crew members, the crew members of the crew that I flew on, the lead crew, the experiences we had in the airplane, and I don't. So that was my story.
Thank you, Colonel Lawrence. Colonel Kenny?
Thank you. Oh, first, I'd like to say that Colonel Cotton and I have been together a long time. I first met him when he arrived at Alamogordo, and then we really became quite closely related when he picked me up at Allentown, Pennsylvania, on a story that would be very interesting if someone would be inclined to tell it. And so we flew to Prescott, Maine, and he and I flew overseas together then. But the story I want to tell, which is rather short, happened at Alamogordo. And it really should be dedicated to not the first, but one of the first or early squadron commanders of 579 Squadron, and the name of Don Appert. And Don was a small man and a perfect double for Douglas Fairbanks Jr. if I ever saw it. And he consciously or unconsciously attempted to behave just about like Fairbanks. And Appert and I came together back at Spokane, Washington, much earlier before, and we knew each other quite well. And so we were roommates at Alamogordo, and quite open barracks, and just one floor, and poorly built and so forth, very open. And everybody was very busy, and Appert had I think it was his squadron executive officer. It could have been his adjutant, I don't know, it was one or the other, but it really didn't make any difference. And this young officer always came down every morning about 6 o'clock. And Appert didn't need an alarm clock because this officer woke him up every morning at 6 o'clock. Well, that was all right when things was regular, but as time pressed on and checking out all the crews, well, Appert was flying every night, and he'd get in about 4 o'clock in the morning. And so it didn't take very much of that and Appert had a short fuse anyway, and very charming man. I could hear him cuss him a little bit and telling this fellow that he just had about 2 hours of sleep and not to wake him up anymore. He'd had enough. And so Appert said to me, I'm going to get that son of a bitch if it's the last thing I ever do. And so just a few nights later, Appert and I both flew on that night, and we got in about 4 o'clock. And I don't know, just walked, but I heard the door open, didn't think much about it. And the next thing I heard Appert cuss. And I heard him say, get out of here, you SOB. And about that time, bang, bang, bang. And the next thing was, the screen door wasn't open. The guy just went right straight through it. And fortunately it was just one story there, because the whole bullet holes went right through the floor. He had fired between this man and my bunk. He had no intention to hit him. All he wanted to do was scare the devil out of him, and he did. And I don't know what happened, but we never saw him again. He must have went straight to the floor and said, I want to get out of this GD outfit. And I don't know how many people knew about the shooting on account of, I think, the barracks may have been pretty well cleaned out at the time the shooting took place. To think back on it is really hilarious, but it was typical Appert. He was a nice guy. It's too bad we lost him. And Colonel Giles was just told out in his death.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Rocky has a comment about Appert, I'm sure.
Well, as an enlisted man, of course, we thought, you know, Captain Appert he was everything you've heard. He was a very vivacious, sort of outgoing fellow, and he would do anything. He was kind of the guy. And we went out to, Bill Seton can remember, we were out of Alamogordo, and we went out to practice bomb at Wilcox Dry Lake, I think it was. So, and they had a Jeep that went running around. Appert was the command pilot that day, and we went over there, and nobody's going to hit this damn Jeep, except Appert's crew. So what he did, he split us up, and everybody went in from a different direction. We blew the thing up. On the way back to Alamogordo, we were all sort of sitting there enjoying a nice low flight, and all at once we were watching the rocks go by. Captain Appert had that B-24 flying inside the Grand Canyon. And I want to tell you, if you want to see the Grand Canyon, go inside. But that was the type of man he was.
Thanks, Rocky.
Can I just take one more?
One more.
Let me tell you one more minute. We had, our enlisted men, you know, never had a permanent rank. It was either all up or all down. We had two chaps who got busted, and I want to tell you, it wasn't 14th Amendment due process either. And so these two enlisted men got busted, and to flying crewmen, the lowest grade of an enlisted man was a PFC. There was nothing worse than a PFC. So we were in Topeka, and our tail gunner and one of our radio operators, Captain Appert, we just got back from a skip bomb mission or something, said, you know, Captain, sir, we don't want to fly as PFCs. And he said, okay, you'll fly as PBTs. Yes, sir, thank you. But I tell you, he was a very dramatic man.
Colonel Whitaker.
I'm not going to be humorous. You all know I was the original squadron bombardier, the 14th Combat Wing Bombardier for 1 week, and the 2nd Air Force Division Bombardier from May of 1944, April rather, of 44, up to VE Day. The one humorous thing I could say about VE Day, that General Hugland and I were on top secret orders going back to the Pentagon, and we celebrated that great night of all places in Reykjavik, Iceland. And that was I'm going to refer to my notes, but I selected from my own personal experience about the early days of the 392nd and I've selected training in the States and how it paid dividends in combat. The 392nd Bomb Group was cited on the 15th of June of 1944 by Major General Jimmy Hodges, who I was working for, after the completion of our first 100 missions. The citation reads that the unit dropped over 5,000 tons of bombs with a degree of accuracy consistently much greater than that achieved by any other unit of this command, meaning all of the 14 B-24 groups in the 2nd Air Division, 8th Air Force. Our group was also cited on April the 20th of 1945, and we received the Distinguished Unit Citation for the Gotha mission. That rate, of course, was February 24th of 1944. That citation was signed by Major General Bill Kepner, who succeeded Jimmy Hodges and who I also worked with. This citation was really a great honor for this group. Both General Hodges and General Kepner ranked the 392nd Bomb Group as being the best trained group of the 14 combat groups in the 2nd Air Division of the 8th Air Force. And you people might say to me, you're exaggerating. I personally was present on numerous occasions when that statement was made by both those generals. The stateside training was excellent, and our combat record confirms that. Our group was written up regularly in Target Victory for its bombing record. This, of course, was the 2nd Air Division publication for combat crews, and I had the privilege of help forming that. And maybe that's why, if you go to the library in Norwich, there's a whole set of Target Victory. And you can leaf through them, and if you take count of how many times the 392nd Bomb Group was mentioned, it's a hell of a lot more than any other bomb group, and I was glad that I was in the position to certainly have the editor highlight the 392nd. But it was all deserving. It wasn't done any other way, but really fine bombing accuracy. Sure, we had some failures like everybody else, but overall, this group had no competitive record in the B-24 2nd Air Division. We were absolutely at the top. Now let me quickly review some of our training, but first let me state that Colonel Rendell, plus the headquarters staff, the squadron commanders, plus their lead crews, we were all dedicated to get bombs on the target. Bombing accuracy was our primary mission. The ground personnel were equally dedicated. When I first met Bo in Geiger Field, I always remember this experience. He said, "Whit," I think he called me that then, but he said, "Whit, there's one thing that we're all in together, and a mission is one thing to get bombs on the target." And he never changed that thinking. Somebody could relate the famous story that he came back at me after in a briefing, and I made the statement at that briefing that the primary job that day was definitely to get bombs on the target, and that was the only reason we were in the theater. And Bo Rendell stood up and said, "Whit," and everybody, he said, "Look," he said, "there are some other things that we are doing over here," and it just took the tension right out of it. At Blythe, California, we had some of our elite crews with us, and we carried out joint navigation and bombing missions. We used targets in the Los Angeles area and others for, like Catalina and the shipyards, for dry runs. We recorded that accuracy of those bombing training missions with the K-20 cameras, and we were able to analyze the accuracy of the run. When we went to Orlando, Florida with our lead crews, we continued this training, and we also flew the night searchlight run from Orlando to Brookville, Florida, that the RAF had set up. Now you want to remember that daylight bombing was in jeopardy, and we were actually given the opportunity for evasive action and for probable night bombing, which, if you know, we never did, fortunately. We were in Orlando for 3 weeks, and then we went to Biggs, El Paso, Texas, and at Biggs I took my lead bombardiers to Midland, Texas for a week of training on the Sperry bomb site. We had all been trained on the Norden bomb site, and on May the 17th we were transferred up to Alamogordo, New Mexico, and trained there until July 11th, and then to Topeka, Kansas, and to England. Let me diverse just quickly in relationship to this point on the Norden bomb site versus the Sperry S-3. The 392nd Bomb Group at Abbeville on the first mission that I led, we were the first American airmen to take the Sperry bomb site over a target in the European theater. Now the RAF had the old S-1 prior to that and utilized it quite a bit. Both at Biggs and Alamogordo, formation flying was emphasized, plus the practice bombing on different ranges and the navigation and gunnery missions. I didn't know about that story that you told there, but I'll tell you, I can remember only twice in my life I was ill in an aircraft, once with my dear wife in a Waco, way back when we flew together at the university. The other time was at Alamogordo when we were checking lead crews out, going down on the deck on practice bombing. And I'll tell you, you tried to keep your self-control. That was rough. That was the only 2 times I ever was ill. We ran ground schools plus bombardier making dry runs in the bomb training buildings. Some of the subjects that we had in ground school were target enemy aircraft identification, armament, bombing maintenance, bomb site maintenance and security, and also aerial gunnery. We didn't shoot down an aerial target, fortunately, but I believe that there were some close calls. Arriving in England on August the 15th, we had around 2 weeks of continued training prior to combat. Again, we used English cities for targets. We recorded the results with K-20s. Our training was excellent in the States, and it paid off in combat. As the first 392nd Bombardier, 14th Combat Wing, and then 2nd Air Division Bombardier, it was a privilege for me to have been part of the success of the 392nd Bomb Group.
Would you care to comment on the bombing results, Colonel Gill?
Just let me give a hearty amen to Joe's assessment of the status of the 392nd within the division, and I think we held up our end pretty well throughout the 8th Air Force status of bombing accuracy. And I think much of that is due to the initial leadership of Joe, the constant pounding that Joe gave to the lead bombardiers, the inspired leadership and inspiration that came from Bo Rendell, who quietly and persistently reminded us that that was our job, that's what we were there for, to put bombs on the target. What other purpose could we be serving over there unless we did our very best to put the maximum bombs on the target? And I think we did very, very well. We permitted some relaxation due to the characteristics of the B-24 in not insisting on tight formation all the way to the target. That B-24 was a manhandler, and even with 2 pilots up there, if you try to maintain tight formation for hours and hours, you were about ready to be carried out of the airplane when you got back. But the point was stressed that once the initial point was reached, meaning that you're probably about 10 minutes from the target, that was the time to pack it in, to get in as close as possible in order to concentrate that bomb drop on the target. And I think that type of training and that constant stressing helped us to achieve the status of the 392nd as an accurate bombing group over there in the 2nd Air Division.
Thank you, Colonel Gill. Joe opened up a couple of subjects, and one of them has been briefly mentioned here, and that's our first commanding officer, Colonel Irvin Rendell. I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about that. And Colonel Gill, could you tell me how you first met Colonel Rendell and a little bit about him as a man.
To preface the remark, I'm suddenly reminded of a comment I've heard Jim Gore make several times, maybe verbally, possibly in the newsletter, that he loved that man. And I'd say all of us who knew him loved that man. That was a leader. I first met Bo Rendell in February of '42 at Pendleton. 30 of us came out of Orlando, having come out of flying school shortly before that time, spent about 2 or 3 months in the Orlando area. After Pearl Harbor, initial stint with Sub Patrol, and about 30 of us transferred to the 34th Bomb Group. Its mission was to serve as a parent training group, and at that time stationed at Pendleton, Oregon. Bo Rendell was a first lieutenant there, quite recently assigned as squadron commander, and it took a few days for we 30 new shavetails to size him up. But the first real impression that we got of what kind of a commander we're serving under, he was a fairly senior first lieutenant at the time. He went through flying school, Randolph in '33, got his commission in late '34 or '35, was when he got his promotion to captain. And the next morning, after he got the word and had an opportunity to buy captain's bars, he had an officer's call out on the ramp at Pendleton, called us all together at attention, and he said essentially this. In fact, he said exactly this. Men, see these bars on my shoulders? We all nodded very respectfully. We saw those bars on his shoulders. He said, from now on, stop calling me Stinky in front of the troops. What better quick appraisal can you get of a man who would tell the second lieutenants under him a comment like that? That night, he invited all of us to a promotion party at his house off the base there at Pendleton. And there again, we gained a still newer impression of Bo Rendell as a perfect host at the party. He certainly made you feel at home, and the bar was amply supplied that night. After Pendleton, let me see. Well, while we're at Pendleton, Bo Rendell, flying with me for 2 or 3 training missions, gave me my first real appreciation of precision instrument flying, instilled in me a love of instrument flying. He'd done a short stint in the late 30s flying with commercial airlines, Western Air Express. I don't know what they flew or exactly where, but apparently he was well indoctrinated there in how to fly instruments. He passed that information to me in 3 or 4 hours of personal training over the base. I think it led up to the designation of some of us as instrument instructor pilots. But he taught me many, many things that I never realized about instrument flying, and made me start to look and hope for bad weather to get permission to take off to fly for real rather than under the hood. Bo, back to, we're moving on into the Blythe period now, when we all were assigned to Blythe shortly before the cadre of us went to join the 392nd Tucson. Bo Rendell was set up to take the 390th Bomb Group to England, the B-17 group in the 1st Division. And he'd earmarked a number of us, because we'd all served together about a year. He said, I want you to go with me in the 392nd. Boy, we were ready to go. Then at the 11th hour, in fact, it was almost literally that, one night in Blythe, I got a call from him that I've been on the phone all day with the 2nd Air Force. They saw some B-24 time on my record. And of course, all of us had some. The 34th Bomb Group mostly had B-17s, but for a short period, we were re-equipped suddenly with B-24s overnight. But to get to the point, he said they want me to take a B-24 group to England, the 392nd. He says, I protested a bit, but he says, I've got to take it. Will you go with me? And of course, I said, yes, sir, I'll go with him. But that's a little bit of background. He, I suppose in about 24 hours, shrugged off his disappointment at taking the 392nd versus the 390th, because there are a lot of good people who went over to England in that 390th, and he envied a little bit the commander who was given the 390th for being able to take that unit that he had trained and set up to go. But I'll say this, we were real lucky that he came and was the commander of the 392nd, because there was none finer, none better than Bo Rendell.
Thank you, Colonel Gill. Joe also on the subject of Abbeville, and are there people in the audience that flew the first mission to Abbeville? 1, 2, 3. I'd be interested in comments from the audience, if you would. Del?
Well, I really don't remember.
This is, let's identify yourself.
Delmer Johnson, I was navigator of the 578, and we were the second and third. Delmer Johnson, I was navigator in the 578. Our crew and one other were the second and third into the squadron. I went on the Abbeville mission, but I remember nothing about it. I just know from my Form 5 that I went on it.
There is an honest man. Yes, sir.
We only went in about 50 miles.
Abbeville was the first mission that the group ever flew, and I guess I have a consensus that, did they call them milk runs then or later?
Yeah.
Could I add a comment on that?
Sure.
It wasn't a milk run for the 44th and the 38 and the other B-24 outfit. There was quite an interesting thing took place. They kept changing the battle order all morning as we were getting ready to prepare that mission. And just as we were, crews were going out the airplane practically, a battle order came in. And Joe and I were all put busy to work again to prepare a new flight plan. And they changed the entry point into France, just a few miles further to the south. And the 44th was leading, as I recall, and they turned in. And so Joe and I said, hey, that wasn't the plan. And so we told the pilot, and he kept right on going down, and we turned in at the IP on the latest battle order we had, and we got no flak. We looked up further to the north, and the 44th was getting worked over. And when we got back on the ground, Colonel Rendell got a hold of us real quickly and said, hey, 44th was kicking because we weren't with them on the entry point. And he said, what battle order did you use? And we said, well, the latest that we had. And so they quickly got them all lined up. And the 44th apparently had ignored the last one or didn't get it. I don't know which it was. And so it was a milk run for us on account of we didn't get any flak at all is where we went in.
Thank God.
But I sweat for a little bit. I thought I goofed on first mission.
Yes, sir.
I was on the raid. I was ball turret gunner, crew 9-1 in the 579.
And your name, sir?
Hoffman, Dick Hoffman.
Dick Hoffman.
Yeah, I picked the
579
crew when
spot.
we landed. They photographed us when we got off the airplane. And our officers were all promoted on our crew immediately after landing. They were moved up into staff positions because the bomb pattern, the part of the target that we had was in the woods. And we started the bomb pattern at the edge of the woods, and it was completed at the other end of the woods. And everything was blasted in between, and that's where they had all these buildings that was targeted by the 579. I flew with Appert, And he thought he was a fighter pilot, and he wanted to be one.
That's exactly right. He was our kind of a guy.
If I could add one other little thing, I learned many years later that Abbeville was where my Paddock ancestors had come from. And they had spelt their name back then, P-A-D-O-Q-U-E.
That's why they called you KQ? The other, somebody else, it was Colonel Myron that opened up the subject of mission number 3, the diversion, where we sustained the first losses in the group. And are there people out here in the audience who flew that one? May we have some comment from back here about the diversion? Yes, sir. Your name, sir?
Milt Plange. I was navigator on the 578th of John Reed's crew. I was listening to Myron's account, and the gentleman sitting next to me, also, you were in the 77, flew on the same mission, and we have the same recollection, but not the same one Myron's. I remember Colonel Abbott too. He was a piece of cake. I mean, a piece of business. This guy was something else. He gave me my first and only promotion in the 392nd when they cashiered Maxwell's crew. Wasn't he the lead crew? And he got Appert or Rendell got rid of him. This guy was a United Airline pilot that couldn't fly formation. Every time Rendell would move his plane into Maxwell's waist wing, he'd move to the left, and he'd be all over the sky. Anyway, he had designated Meeker, and I became a navigator, moved up with anyway, Meeker wound up in a ball of fire in Iowa. I met a fellow here that told me the account of it. But getting on to diversion, we were up here, and I was looking out the left window, and these 109s come in, and I don't recall the plane hitting Appert's ship. All I saw was go up, and he did. There were one plane hit the other, but my account, my recollection is the same as Jim Busick, is that the third plane was shot down. It wasn't hit. It went up, but in a separate incident. But it all happened like that. And I think we were all pretty well shaken up. The mine is the first to go. I even have a different account of Gotha too, but I don't want to go into that. I was at Gotha.
Thank you, sir. And I would be, that's an interesting question that you mentioned. What was the reaction on the base about the first losses in the 392nd? Anybody care to comment on that? Go right.
Our crew, I think that was the first, we did not fly the diversion mission, that's why I'm sitting here. But our crew, Castle's crew, and Captain Sutton and Lieutenant Coleman, we were off on I think it was the first 72-hour leave that we'd had since we left Topeka. And so when we got back, which was the next morning, we heard about this, and I want to tell you, one of the most saddest recollections that I have of that mission was packing up those B bags and packing up the barracks of the men that we had known for a year. We had trained with them, we knew their families, we knew their wives if they were married, we knew their background, and that was really, I think, the saddest moment of our whole career in England, was packing up those empty the goods in those empty barracks and taking them over to supply to either reissue or send home. It was a very depressing experience. And the weather helped too. Remember, it was foggy all the time. But that was the saddest. That was the saddest issue that I think we ever had.
Thank you, Rocky. Yes, sir.
I was on the mission also, and by the time we got back to the barracks, one crew from there was gone. They packed them up, moved them out. You talk about a feeling.
Oh yeah.
And the other Niesemer hut, where the other two crews were, it was totally empty. We used to go to breakfast with those guys in the morning, and then one morning they were gone. It was just instant.
That was Dick Hoffman speaking there. There's a story here that still has to be told, and that's the journey of the ground echelon across the ocean on the Queen Mary. And because they came on the Queen Mary. And I'd like Gil Bambar to tell us that story, and how much money he won in the poker game, and how many potatoes he peeled, and all that stuff.
Well, as I have said before, I was very lucky. I had no responsibility except do what I was told to do. So one morning real early, we were entrained or in truck or somehow got to Port of New York. And we were told to stand at attention out or parade rest or something. They said, now what we're going to have to do here. And we were facing what I thought was a steel building. It turned out to be the Queen Mary. We marched forward, went into a building, went up some steps, and then over across the gangplank into the Queen Mary. And we were told we were assigned D deck, certain section of it, one night, and the next night we were on boat deck. So we had to share every other night our bunking privileges with someone else. But the very first thing we did once we got on the ship, after we were told all these nice things, was to follow the leader, and so we went down to winding staircases and things down what I thought was the bottom of the ship. We came up to this hole, and the hatch was open. Okay, guys, dump your barracks bags. So we dropped the barracks bags, and let me tell you something, it was a while before we heard them hit the bottom. So that was my first recollection of the trip across the sea. Of course now it's an ocean, but we went by ourselves, and for the first day they had some long-range escort ships, 24s or something, following us out a ways, and then they would wiggle their wings and take off and leave us, and every 7 minutes we were zigzagging across the North Sea. We got into one hell of a storm. One night while I was on boat deck, the other two buddies of mine, we housed ourselves in between two racks of rafts and put a couple of our shelter halves on the railing that separated the boat deck from the open water. And we were snug and we were sleeping, and the fellow that I went to work for finally at Windling, the 392nd, came along and he says, "You're not supposed to be up here any longer." The call came out, everybody inside. And here we had all this equipment we had unlaced from the railing and repacked, put into our knapsacks, jump inside. There was nothing any longer available, so we slept in the hallways, or tried to. And all night long, it was a rough trip even for the Queen Mary. The gals were getting sick, the nurses were getting sick, and they were jumping over us trying to get to the latrines. It was one heck of an interesting night, let me tell you.
I agree with that.
Very good.
That's Carwin Thomason. That's an amen to that. How many troops aboard? Do you remember, Gil?
I think there was 18,000. And there were sections you couldn't move up above a certain area, but you could stand on a fantail and look, or the bow, and look back up, and you could see people sitting out in lawn chairs and things. These were the, guys at the penthouse and the gals. But there wasn't too much of that. They had a 5-inch cannon on that ship, and they fired that. How many times a day did they fire that cannon? You all went across the same time, practically. But anyway, they had gunnery practice. And that scared some of us, because we didn't know just when this was going to happen. And it didn't happen always at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It might happen at 1 or something like that. And there was debris out there in the ocean. Let me tell you, it was kind of interesting when you're all by yourself in one ship.
Just to give a little comparison here, some of us went back to Windling on the QE2 when was that, 90? And capacity on the Queen Elizabeth II, which is a much larger ship, is currently 1,800 people, as compared to the 18,000 men they jammed into the Queen Mary going across the sea.
Say one other thing. I know you probably know that everybody had to get some kind of food each day, otherwise they couldn't succeed in this life. So we had a breakfast that morning after that storm, and I'm telling you, this huge old mess hall was empty. And there was food sitting out there that was not even touched. And it was a shame because they just kept bringing it up. And nobody was eating. They were just all sick.
Joe, there's something that I would like to talk to you about. The longest mission that the 392nd ever flew, 10.5 hours. And
Well, some 11 is correct. 10.5 was the official, but, excuse me.
What was correct?
You said 11 hours, is that what was stated there?
I don't know.
Well, let me get into it.
Go for it.
All right, I'm going to refer to my notes, but let me quickly go over it. It was really an interesting one. The longest mission that the 392nd Bomb Group flew was the Thursday, November the 18th, 1943. And by the way, when it's over, there's the original Stars and Stripes that covers both Norwegian missions that the 392nd was on. It was 10.5 hours duration, 1,500 miles, one to the Oslo-Kjeller Air Base, which was about 11 miles east-northeast of Oslo itself. This base was the Nazis' largest maintenance depot in Scandinavia, seeing the Me-109s and FW-190s, formed the Scandinavian Luftwaffe divisions, plus these aircraft off the Russian front. So it was a heck of an important target. We took off before daybreak, flying up to Scotland, then across the North Sea to the Skagerrak, and then north on the Skagerrak to our target. The weather was CAVU throughout the mission, and we bombed at an altitude of 12,000 feet. By gosh, I'll tell you later, I was awarded a DFC, but anybody that day had any bombing training, you sure in hell were going to hit that target. It was a beautiful day. On the bomb run, the lead bombardier, Lieutenant Good, had an automatic pilot malfunction, and I was in the deputy lead and took over about 2 minutes to the bombs away. The group had 75% of our 500-pound GP bombs within 2,000 feet of the aiming point. On return to the base, then Colonel Leon Johnson, who was 14th Combat Wing Commander, stated that after seeing the strike photos, I would say that the target was completely destroyed. And they didn't use it for a long while. The flak was meager, however, we did encounter Me-109s, 110s, 210s, Ju-88s, FW-190s, both going into the target and coming back down the Skagerrak. This was the first mission that we were hit by rockets from the Ju-88s. And all of you remember, when they were launched today, you started to see them coming to you. You sure hoped that they didn't get you. They were rough. The 392nd dispatched 22 aircraft, 21 bombed over the target. 3 other groups of the 44th, 93rd, and the 389th make a total of 82 B-24s over the target. There were 9 aircraft lost. 2 from our group, and 3 went into Sweden, including 1 from our group. The brief time over the target was high noon, and Patty, you recall the bombs away were at 12:03, and that was a great credit to all who flew that mission. That was a long mission. There was no fighter support on this long mission at all. Our B-24s of the 2nd Air Division were stood down then after that because of weather until November 26th. So we had a little bit of a rest, a little over a week. And that was when we flew our second mission to Bremen, which many of you will remember that. The 4 groups dropped a total of 828 500 GPs on the Oslo Aerodrome facility, 260 tons. The other groups bombing that target resulted also with good to excellent results. I was very fortunate in getting a DFC over it, but frankly I didn't deserve it because it was as routine a job of bombing as you ever wanted to get into.
Thank you, Colonel Joe. We're getting down to the witching hour. I'm going to ask Colonel Gill to sum up for a minute, or a few minutes, or however long he wants to take. and so we can get out in time to make the buses. Colonel Gill?
I think perhaps you all have come to the same conclusion that I have, that this hour and a half session this morning has barely scratched the surface of what the 392nd accomplished over there, what we did, what life was like in the air, and we'll get into it another symposium while we're here on more details of what it was like on the ground. But let me make a special appeal to you all here. I know we heard from 3 or 4 or 5 personal experience stories out in the audience. Let me appeal to all of you, and I know all of you have a story, large or small, that you remember. Would you please remember what I think it was Bob Tays last night said, get it in writing. It doesn't have to be a polished piece of journalism. If you have a tape recorder, tape it. We'll take the raw material, whatever it is, if it needs any blue penciling or editing, and we'll do very little of that. We need the basic information that's out there in the heads of all of you and all the rest of the people who did not come to this reunion, but we needed it. We need it. We need to record it for posterity, for our children and grandchildren and so on, to remember what their grandfathers and the suffering that their grandmothers went through while their grandfathers were over there in England. We need to get that reduced to writing. So please think about it, and we don't really care how rough it is around the edges, but get it in writing while you still have some memory left. I'm losing mine fast, and I'm making a lot of promises to my family to do this, not only for the family, but I need to do it also for this work that we're doing for the 392nd book.
Colonel Gill, thank you very much. These men preceded most of us into the 392nd. They set up the organization, they set up the standards, they showed us the way. So please join me in thanking them for today and for them. Meeting's adjourned.
Promotions come upon you just as high as you desire. You're riding on the gravy train when you're an Air Force flyer. But just when you're about to be a general, you find the engine coughs, the wings fall off, and you will never mind. You'll never mind. You'll never mind. You'll never mind. You'll never mind. Oh, come and join the Air Force, and you will never mind. You're flying across the ocean when you hear your motor spit. You see your prop come to a stop and all the gauges quit. The ship won't float, you cannot swim, the shore is miles behind. You'll be a dish for happy fish, but you will never mind. You'll never mind. You'll never mind. You'll never mind. You'll never mind. Oh, come and join the Air Force and you will never mind. You'll never mind. You'll never mind. You'll never mind. You'll never mind. Oh, come and join the Air Force and you will never mind.